get it can just locate that link. Please do me that favor. Just get that link and paste it here on the chat box. Now, in this, it's a wonderful book, but the first chapter, which is called Historical Introduction, in about 40-50 pages, traces the work of the Constituent Assembly. And I think far and away, I think I've seen all the other books that are there on the Constituent Assembly, and simply it can be any of them, but they just do not match up to these two. So that's really what I'm going to be concentrating on, and I'm mentioning these two books to you for additional reading. It's not as if we're ever, from an examination point of view, it really adds nothing, but can I request one of you to just please paste that link here, Framing of India. Thank you. So that one will give you, and you can read it either in EPUB format or in PDF or whatever, or Kindle, whichever version you like to read it on. Okay. Now, we have noticed that I'm wanting to flag what I think are the important political questions and legal questions that arose during the Constituent Assembly period. Now, we're talking of a time between 1946 and 49. I will expect you to read and familiarize yourself with. Last class I talked to you about structure and the functioning, etc. I don't want to take up class time on that. I want to focus on a couple of the key political questions that arose in the 46 to 49 period. Now, if you take the Constituent Assembly, was it a directly elected assembly or was it indirectly elected? Between head of state and head of government, is it possible for us to have both as the same person? Can anybody else answer my question? Because what Akshay indicated to us is his difference between democracy and a republic by vocation of head of state and head of government. If the head of state is elected, he says it's a democracy. It's a republic. If it is by way of primogeniture or hereditary, we would say it's a monarchy. Head of government, if elected, we say it's a democracy. My question to you is, why is it necessary to have a separate head of state and a separate head of government? Is it possible to merge two of them? Are there any examples that you can give me?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, no, somebody else. Who is this person M who first said yes? Manu Manchanda. Please.
Ma'am, it's US. The president.
Explain to me what makes the head of government merge into the head of state? What is that form of government called?
It's a presidential form of democracy.
Presidential form of democracy. And so, does it become a democracy or does it also become a republic or does it become both?
Both, ma'am.
It becomes both. That's right. Is there any other answer anybody else wanted to give? Okay. So, yes. So, there's no need that you must have this separate. If you have two separate, you're basically following the British system, or another way to put it is to say that you're following the
parliamentary democracy.
Parliamentary democracy, or the Westminster. Okay, let me spell it. I can't spell it. The Westminster form of government. The reason being, this is just a little more elegant way of saying it, because in England, the head of government and Parliament sits in Westminster House. So a Westminster form of government is the same way of saying it as a parliamentary form of government, where Parliament, the head of government sits, and of course in Rashtrapati Bhavan, the head of state sits. But you could have the other, where the American White House, where the president is both. Okay. Now let's come back to our Constituent Assembly. Independent sovereign republic. Why should we have republic? So the strongest objection to this first paragraph in the objectives resolution came, and it comes as no surprise. Whom do you think objected the most to this? Who do you think would have objected the most to India becoming a republic?
From the princely states.
Yes, absolutely. You're totally right. And they had a great fear what would happen to us. Okay. Remember that they were in a minority. So notwithstanding their objections, got carried and got approved in early 47, but that was one set of objection. The other set of objection came from others who were not objecting on the ground of what will happen to our monarchy if we became a princely, if we became a republic, which was a concern of a large number of the princely states. But the other set of objections came from a large number of members of the Constituent Assembly who felt that if we become a republic and we have an elected head of state, how can we continue to be a part of the British Commonwealth? Now, what is that concern addressing? What is this concern addressing? Would anybody like to tell me how does British Commonwealth, becoming a member of the British Commonwealth, why was this a concern?
Ma'am, because
Yeah, Madhulika.
Ma'am, because they thought it would affect the sovereignty of India. And being an independent nation, they also thought that we would still be under some sort of supranational organization. So that was a concern.
No, this set of people didn't have a worry because if you're sovereign and you're a republic, you will not be a part. These people had a wish to be a part of the Commonwealth. And they said, if we become a republic and we declare ourselves to be sovereign, how can we continue to be members of the British Commonwealth? Because the British Commonwealth consists of 8 former colonies. I'll tell you how India continues to be a member of the British Commonwealth. We had our Commonwealth Games here. But barring India, all the other states, the head of state of Australia, of Canada, continued to be the British Queen. Okay, and their worry was that if we became a republic, they had no objection to becoming a democracy. But they said if we became a republic, we cannot continue to be part of the British Commonwealth. And that is again, what word can I say? It's an irony that there was such a great interest that we must be a part of the British Commonwealth because they wanted to be part of the other bodies that were part of the Commonwealth, and eventually, just before the Constitution got adopted in November 1949, in July 1949, the Commonwealth met and they declared that even if India should become a republic, even if it should reject the Queen to be the head of the state, she would continue to be a welcome member of the British Commonwealth. And therefore, that debate, that Commonwealth aspect of the debate for becoming a republic went away. India should be an independent sovereign state. It should be an independent sovereign state. That was one political decision that got taken. And this, as students of history, you will realize, is a far cry from the initial demand that got put forward from 1916 onwards at least, for India to be a dominion. Okay? You remember dominion? Okay, what's the difference between being a dominion and a sovereign state?
Ma'am, in a dominion, the whole government will function under the supremacy of under the Queen.
Somebody, a colonial ruler. Okay.
Yes.
But can it still be a democracy and be a dominion?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Himanshu, how can you be a dominion and a democracy? Explain.
ma'am, currently Australia is a dominion, being
That's true.
yes.
That's true. That is, you accept the suzerainty of another country head of state as your head of state, but your government still is conducted along democratic lines of so Australia is an example. Now remember that from 1916 till virtually late early 30s, the demand of the Congress Party and the Muslim League and many other political forces in India was that we must be a dominion. Okay, Okay, it's actually only after the Simon Commission and the Round Table that we started putting forward the fresh demand that we want complete Swaraj. So though Tilak had put forward the notion of Swaraj, in political terms, intermediate, there was this demand of dominion which got rejected by the British, and then that also got swept away and we went forward to full complete independence. So we have a sovereign, and like you have studied in first year jurisprudence, a sovereign is one who habitually does not obey anybody else, and therefore you are the ultimate master. So we wanted to have a sovereign state. Now, since many of you have studied a little bit of international law and political science, under the Westphalian notion of a state, what are all the ways in which we would describe a state? Why did the British reject the demand of India being a dominion? They did not even want to give that little bit. And let me tell you, since you've asked the question, let me tell you, because I've done quite some research in this area. They said, we will give you representative government. We are willing to give you part elections in 1919, but we cannot give you self-governance. And according to them, Canada as well as Australia, and I think that there was this racist issue that those are white people that are capable of governing themselves, but Indians have still to learn how to govern themselves. So while they were willing to give us representative democracy, they were not willing to give us self-governance, even of the limited nature of being a dominion, and that got rejected by the Governor Generals in that 1900 to 1930 period. Yes, Vinashakale Viparita Buddhi, truly. So, therefore, okay, so what is the definition of a state in political science? Anybody? What are the ingredients for being a state? Sovereignty, population, territory, and government. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah, normally this is, and there is a Montevidean Convention of 1933 in international law which sort of incorporates these ingredients. So to be an independent state, you need all of this, right? So the first one, so therefore, are you a democratic republic, a sovereign, and are you independent? The second very important political question that came up was, what is the form of government that we are going to adopt? Now, in the objectives resolution, I'm reading one more paragraph in the objectives resolution, wherein all power and authority of the sovereign independent India and its constituent parts and organs of the government are derived from the people. That is, sovereignty is, we are a sovereign country vis-a-vis other states. That is, we go to no one. We are not habitually obedient to anybody else. But that sovereignty should be derived from the people. And that was a very difficult question. And when I come to the preamble, I'm going to come to that. But where does sovereignty rest in India is a very bitterly contested question in India. And if you look at the wonderful judgments in Keshavan and the Bharati's case, they deal with that. I'll just come to that in a little more, 10 minutes or so. But before that, the next political question was, what is the form of government that we must have? And the union powers and the form of government, the committees that dealt with it, they had before them 2-3 options. Gandhiji, from outside the Constituent Assembly, said, India is a land of villages. These are little village republics. Remember, he's famously supposed to have said that the soul of India rests in its village. And he said we must have the panchayats as the basic unit. And then these panchayats would elect provincial assemblies. And the provincial assemblies in turn will elect a central legislature or a parliament, whatever name one wants to give it. So it would have been a 3-tiered form of government. which essentially means that the central parliament would have been an indirectly elected body. That was very forcefully put forward by Gandhiji. He sort of intervened from outside in 1946-47, but by the time 1947 came, remember that our Constituent Assembly was taking place in the backdrop of the most bloody partition the world has ever seen. The numbers of people killed in India during partition far exceeds the number that were killed in the Holocaust. We should never ever forget how many people died in that partition. And basically Gandhiji said, no, I don't even want to stay in Delhi. He left Birla House and then he went away to Noakhali in Bengal. And he was there pretty much, yes. And so that was one. The other was a smaller set of people who believed that we should follow the American model of a presidential form of government, which we just now discussed. Head of state, head of government merged in one, president directly elected, etc. But the majority that carried the day in the Constituent Assembly settled for a parliamentary Westminster form of government, where you have a directly elected parliament, which will those that have the majority in that parliament, directly elected parliament, will be invited to form the government. And therefore, one part of the executive will become part of the government. Not separation of powers, but fusion of powers. The executive and the legislature will be held together by what the British House of Lords described as that buckle which holds the legislature and the executive together. You know, the parliamentary form of government. By that, what do I mean? That the executive, that is the head of the government, the Prime Minister and his or her cabinet, will also be members of Parliament and will also be accountable back to Parliament. So they have dual role to play. They are both legislators. So this was the one that actually carried the day. The third big question was whether India should be unitary or should be federal. I'm going to take it up in the next class, okay? But just for now, let me flag for you. For tomorrow's class, I want you all to read the S.R. Bommai judgment extract, which is there in topic 1. Because federalism and the nature of federalism and the Constituent Assembly debates I take up tomorrow. But suffice for now to say that the idea of having one union government was done away with. They accepted the 1935 Government of India Act that we would have both provincial governments and a central government. Okay. But where the residuary power should go tomorrow. That was a third debate. Fourth question was, should we have separate or single electorates? And you already know that after the Roundtable Conference, there was a rejection of the 1909 India Councils Act, which had been based on the Monumental reforms, as well as the 1919 Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, and we did away with selectoral electorates, and we had universal adult franchise in Article 326 of the Constitution. It says that all Indians shall have franchise. So that one got settled without too much controversy. But the one debate that took up virtually 3/4 of the time of the draft constitution. Remember, the draft constitution got presented in early 1949 and finally got adopted in November 1949, 26th November. The debate that took up the maximum time in the Constituent Assembly, what do you think the political debate was? I've run through adult franchise, I've done through form of government, I've gone through unitary or federal, fundamental rights, minorities also did not get that much debate. It got done, the election, which is the part of the Constitution that you think was so controversial, that really held up the Constituent Assembly. Any guesses?
Languages, official language.
Official language, you're completely right. Almost 3/4 of the time was spent on official language. should we have one compulsory language in India, or should we have what Singapore has, that you have the English as the link language and you have the three main languages spoken in Singapore, which is Chinese, Malay and Tamil as the three official languages. How should we do? And this one literally split that Constituent Assembly almost apart. I would like to say one point here. See, you're all going to be lawyers, you're going to be judges. And you've already seen, you're all young adults, and you know how difficult it is to work in a committee with people whose views you disagree with. How difficult it is to work with some team member whom you actually don't like. After all, it's very difficult to like everybody. It must be said in defense of the Constituent Assembly that such a complex country as India, operating in the backdrop of partition, operating in the backdrop of a million parties and a million breaks, and remember the Communist Party people were members, there was Socialist Party, there was a Minnu Masani and his party, there was Lohiites, there was Congress, which itself had varieties of political views. You had the Janasangh and the precursors to the Janasangh, all were there, many parties, and many of these committees had not just Congress members but different types of people, and even within the Congress you know that there was many other views. You must learn from this exercise how artfully really they conducted their meetings and in what a civilized manner they conducted their meetings. If you went through the select documents, you know, volumes 2, 3, 4 of Framing of India's Constitution, these are verbatim reports. Okay? Somebody has carefully minuted these things. And you will see that nobody is throwing a fight. Nobody is calling the other abusive names. They are maintaining some civilized decorum. And they've conducted it and then they brought it finally to the vote, and then after it's been voted on, well, you lost, but then you just carry on, pick yourself up to go to another day. Now that's a skill which a lawyer truly needs. No lawyer who ever loses his temper in court is ever going to succeed. You will lose the judge that very minute. If you're not well prepared, we say you lose the judge, meaning what? Judge is not going to listen to you after that. Judge's mind gets made up because you're dealing with human beings. How do you talk to people and how do you win them over? How do you strategize what is your argument? You don't have to put your best argument right up in front. You're not a child. You can develop it. You can hold down. You can speak your slowly and unfold your arguments by and by, and then finally go for the jugular, for the big argument. And you see that play out in all these, both in the assembly debates and in the subcommittees. Now that official language truly was one like that. Okay. And the language issue, the compromise that finally got done was, it was not only Hindi versus English, okay? Should it be Hindustani? Because remember that Hindi is a more Sanskritized form of the Hindustani that was spoken. Because Hindustani that gets spoken is has loan words from Urdu, it has loan words from Persian. In fact, as law students, you will notice that if you go to a police station and if you read any FIR, you'll be surprised at the number of Persian words that are there. Have you ever looked at the FIR in Delhi?
Ma'am, I have read a FIR in Urdu as well as Hindi. It was very difficult to comprehend.
But even if you read it in Hindi, it will have a large number of Urdu words.
Even in Tehsil's office, ma'am, Kanun ko and all.
Even in the Tehsil's office. In fact, I have been saying for a very long time that we must have a non-credit course where we just put out a list of some words that will be useful. Many of you who go to UP, if you look at the UP Land Reforms Act, UP Tenancy Act, it is full of, have you looked at land If you look at land maps, the Akzara, it is completely in Persian. Okay, you will need words in Persian, and therefore maybe one of you can do that exercise. You can look at about 10 FIRs and then put down those words, and maybe in a tutorial class, once one of you tell me in a week or two that you're ready, we'll take 10 minutes to just run through those words, which I think every student must know. And likewise, if you ever look at land documentation in Delhi and Uttar Pradesh, I'm not so familiar with Haryana, but I think pretty much whole of North India, because the land records come to us from very ancient times, are basically full of Persian words, not even Urdu words, Persian words. And it's good to know these things. So the question was whether it should be Hindustani, whether it should be Hindi. And between Hindustani and Hindi, so I'm not even talking about the debate between English and Hindi, mind you. I'm now talking about the hardcore debate within the language, which is, and therefore if you look at Article 343, the compromise finally struck was the official language of the Union shall be Hindi in the Devanagari script. You can already intuitively understand that the southern states, particularly Madras at that time, Tamil Nadu today, violently opposed to Hindi being the official language. So the only way that this happened was by English being the linked language. So if you look at Article 343, subclause 2, it says, notwithstanding anything in clause 1, for a period of 15 years, English language shall continue to be used for all of and the eventual structure of the Constitution as adopted. Now, our Constitution begins with a preamble. I'm just going to introduce it. I'll continue tomorrow. But tomorrow I come on to S.R. Bommai. Preamble, for reading the preamble, I would suggest that you would read 1. The extract from Keshwananda Bharati's case that is there. Number 2, if you can, H.M. Sirvai has written this wonderful book called Partition of India, Legend and Reality. If you have the 4th edition of H.M. Sirvai's 3-volume book on Constitution of India, it's in the last volume. Otherwise, you can get it as a standalone. I'm sure it may be available because there's discussion about this preamble there. Now, what is interesting for us as students of law is the objectives resolution was expected to be modified and to become the preamble. So, in fact, B.N. Rao had used some of these aspects of the objectives resolution and put it forward to the Constituent Assembly while the draft constitution was being discussed as a possible preamble. But there was once again a great deal of opposition to that draft, not for its content, but for the opening words, we the people. How should it be presented? And finally, on 26th November 1950, we adopted the Constitution, but we didn't adopt the preamble. The preamble got adopted 2 months later when it finally came into force. Okay, so that preamble has its own separate history and its own separate political debates backing it. Okay. But the preamble in itself, we say, has the following things. 1, it starts talking in the name of the people. We the people of India. Since I'm going to take attendance, I'm not beginning this political debate, but I'll mention the debate to you, which I will take it up in tomorrow's class. And the political debate in the assembly was, when we were not elected directly by all people, but only indirectly elected by those who had the mandate, some 10 or 20% or whatever that number was, how can we speak in the name of the people of India? That was the debate. Okay. The second part of the preamble, which is not so controversial, was that it contains an enacting clause, and this is something that was required. You see, the Articles 1 to 395 of the Constitution of India just begins, India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. But there is no clause for adopting it. And that gap was fulfilled by the preamble, and that was finally give unto ourselves on this day, okay? And that enacting clause was added by the preamble, okay? And it, of course, talks about the great freedoms that had been part of the Karachi Declaration, which had been part of the Motilal Nehru draft constitution, etc., etc. Okay. So, the preamble is an important issue. So tomorrow, are there any comments or questions? Quickly for a minute, if somebody has questions or comments. So tomorrow, we will begin with the preamble. Please get hold of a copy and keep the preamble with you, and everybody must read the Keshwananda Bharati's case as well as the S.R. Bommai judgment. Okay, I can call on any of you because I'm going to be beginning with those two cases from our case material. Okay, so now let me take attendance.